Welcome to Genealogy Basics. My name is Charity Rouse, Director of Local History for the Spartanburg County Public Libraries. I'm glad you've joined us tonight, and I hope that this is informative and helps you understand a little bit more of the why of genealogy as well as the what of genealogy. So for genealogy, we always start with a question. This is the big question that brings us to genealogy search. What is your goal for researching? Do you want to find a family member? Do you want to research a family story? Do you want to join a lineage society? What's your end goal? And then why is the search important to you? Because genealogy, when you hit a brick wall and you start getting to the tough parts of genealogy, sometimes you have to remind yourself that you do need, you want this information for a purpose. So what is your question? Who am I? That could be a question. A lot of adoptees in particular ask that question. You want to know a little bit more about where your family came from. Is this family story true? Biggest family story that we hear on a regular basis in the Kennedy room is, well, we have an Indian, a Cherokee princess. And this comes to us from white, black, Indian, brown, doesn't matter what your background. Most families in this region have a Cherokee princess story. Sorry to burst your bubble on this one, but there's no such thing as a Cherokee princess. They're chieftains' daughters, but they're not princesses. Princess is a very European construct. But you may want to know where my immigrant ancestor came from. If you have a Revolutionary War patriot, what does your DNA tell you? Can I join fill in the blank lineage society? There are plenty out there. There's the Indian princess. How long has my family lived in this area? Some people want to research the land that's been in their family for generations. For African Americans, there's often the question of who were my enslaved ancestors and what else can I find out about them? Who were their owners? And just more generally, how can I find information about fill in the blank? It could be a particular great-grandparent that you've always wondered about, or someone you heard served in the military. Or you find a really cool picture like my dad's baby picture with his mama. So genealogy is all about answering the questions while having more questions asked. So we're going to talk a little bit tonight about how and where to start your research and some of the research skills to learn. So the basic rule of genealogy is no matter the question, start with yourself. You may want to know about great-great-grandma who is the one in the Indian princess story. But until you know that that person you think is great-great-grandma is great-great-grandma, you're going to be researching potential alternate ancestors, and that can be a problem. So go ahead and start with yourself. These skills that you start learning, working with documents that are more easily available to you, will be good for you in the long run. So record some basic information about yourself. Just, pick up a legal pad, start jotting it down, jot it down in a Word document. Basic information about yourself. Your name, your birth date, the location, the names of your parents. Where have you lived through the years if you've moved around? My mother has not lived very many places. I've lived in 5 different states. Marriages, if applicable. Where did you attend school? Because sometimes you can find school records or those types of things. And neighborhood schools in elementary school and middle school and things can help narrow down some searching in later part of the search. Go ahead and list your children if you have them. Move back one generation. I know it's tempting to skip. Don't skip. Alternate ancestors can take up a lot of time to research, and then you get very frustrated when you find out that you haven't been researching your ancestor, but somebody else's ancestor. So start with one parent and fill in their information, then do the other parent. Again, birth date, location, their parents' names, any marriages, divorces, if one of them has died, schools, workplaces, locations lived. And you don't have to do a lot of detail on this in this first gathering of information, but start recording the information that you know about them. List their children. If children are from different marriages, and you know which marriage they're from, make that, part of your list. My parents were on their way to a historic ball. They did ballroom dance classes for a while, one year. And then again, you move back one more line at a time. And apparently one of my pictures shifted and my grandmother's head got cut off. Sorry about that. I will get that fixed before the next time. These are my 4 grandparents. Pick one of their lines to work on at a time. You will drive yourself nuts if you just randomly keep working on random people. You will never get anywhere, and you will never answer your original question. Do record siblings in each generation, the brothers and sisters of your ancestor, because these can help you determine if you have the correct family with that name versus a different family with that name. Because there may be other people with the same names in the same place at the same time. And you may find it easier to find mom's maiden name if you're looking at death certificates or marriages of siblings and not just your direct ancestor, if you're in the period of time where death certificates and marriage licenses are available. So we're now 20 years into the 21st century, and we need a 21st century research plan. So we're going to talk a little bit about records and documents, and we're going to talk a little bit about DNA testing. So our first steps are going to be to look for records and documents. Even for adoptees who may not know a whole lot, this stage is kind of important because it's skill building. So if you don't know who your birth family is, look at your adoptive family and start gathering information on them, because it will be easier, because again, those are probably known relationships. And so you can build some skills on how to find and build your tree, find people and build your tree on that before you jump into the biological family situation. But for the rest of us, gathering the records and documents is critical. DNA testing just tells us we're related to somebody. It does not tell us how we're related to someone. So we need vital records, obituaries, federal state census, local and family history books, online trees, communicate with other researchers, and just as a piece of emphasis, a tree is not a source. A document is a source. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Family websites, you may find local historical or genealogical society websites that have transcripts of information and different things, or library and archive websites that have documents that you might be interested in. For DNA testing, because we are in the 21st century and because it is such a big thing, you're probably, many people are going to want to do a DNA test just to get the ethnicity huge, huge, huge big caveat of DNA testing. If you are scared of the skeleton in the closet, you don't want to know about family members that may have been given up for adoption or unknown parentage kinds of situations, then just don't DNA test. It is likely that those situations will come to light anyway, because more than 18 million testers have tested at Ancestry. And a lot of them are probably related to you. But if you are concerned about that, don't DNA test. It's just that simple. There are a number of places to test, and we'll talk through that strategy in just a moment. And one of the reasons why I put this DNA testing at this point is average time for test results right now is about 2 months. So while you're waiting for test results to come back, you can be doing paper trail research. So we need to document the paper trail. Vital records. You may have these at home. You may have, I would hope you have your own, but you may have inherited other family members' marriage certificates or birth certificates or death certificates along the way. Some of these are findable online, and some of these you're going to have to pay a small fee. A lot of them are in the $12 to $20 per certificate range. Some of them for places like New York and Wisconsin are going to be in the $80 range. But this is my grandparents' marriage certificate in Virginia. Virginia records are on Ancestry now. And so you find out information about them, including parents' names and where they were born. And so that's good information to know. You also find out who did the marriage. Death certificates are another thing that are somewhat easily available online, depending on what part of the 20th century you're talking about. One of the things you do have to remember for both marriages and deaths, births as well, a little less typical, but the death or the marriage may not have taken place in the state where your ancestor lived. I have a couple of ancestors from Virginia who traveled to South Carolina to get married because the laws were different at that point. They didn't have to do the waiting. If they eloped to South Carolina, they didn't have to stand up in front of a whole bunch of people. I come from a long strand of introverts on that side of the family, and they didn't want to be the center of attention. This death certificate for my great-grandfather in 1915, he lived in South Carolina. But the tuberculosis hospital was over the border in North Carolina. And so it took a while to get this death certificate confirmed because they also only did F. Rouse. Now that could be a lot of people, but he's the only F. Rouse that I know whose dad was a J.J. Rouse, mom was Louise Thornhill, and R.A. Rouse is his brother. Now, R.A. Rouse is lying. Their mother was not born in Scotland. She was born in Darlington County, South Carolina. I have plenty of proof for that. And and you see that the burial will be in Latta, South Carolina, which, of course, Dillon County is a border county. So if you're not finding a certificate where you think they should be and when you think it should be, and most places started requiring birth, marriage, and death certificates by around 1910 to 1920. Somewhere in that range. Many places, New England, had certificates and registers long before that. You may find obituaries. Obituaries are a great source of family information. We have Joseph Allen, great-grandfather. You have two cousins, my grandmother's cousins, from the Eastern Shore of Virginia. Now, one thing you want to do is when you save the obituary, don't do what I did on these three. You do want to save the name of the paper, the date, the page, and the location of the paper so that you know where it came from. Now, I know that Joseph Allen's came from the state newspaper here in South Carolina, but slap on the back of the hand for me. I didn't do what I should have done. Now, I have these in other places with the citation, but where I saved them on my computer, I did not cite them correctly. Please notice that women may be Mrs. husband name, such as Mrs. Alfred Shreves here on the right. Now, in the obituary, it does say Emma Turner. So there is a possibility that you may get the woman's name in there, but for certain time periods, you are going to see a lot of Mrs. initial last name, which makes it even worse. So, but you also can get names and locations of surviving family members. So a daughter in Baltimore, 6 sons, Baltimore and Onancock, which is on the Eastern Shore of Virginia. Do not take information in an obituary as gospel fact until you double check. I didn't grab this particular obituary, but I made the mistake of not double checking what date my mother told me for her parents' wedding. We were a year off. And I was so busy checking the obituary for names to be spelled correctly and that we had gotten all 9 of the siblings in, that I didn't check the marriage year. And so don't believe it just because it's in print in a newspaper. Do some additional checking. Another great resource as you're getting started for 20th century research and 19th century research, so 1900s and 1800s, are the US federal censuses as well as state censuses for the states that did and kept them. South Carolina, unfortunately, only has fragments. This happens to be a United States federal census for 1900. We have available to us for research up through 1940. There is a 72-year privacy restriction on census information. And if you have not filled in your census for this year in 2020, please go online and fill in the census or call the census and give them the information, because it is an important part of how we function as a country. But on the census, you'll be reading down, and I realize it's small, so you may not be able to see everything, but I'm reading down and I see Bennett's and Bennett's and Bennett's and Bonnewell and Custis and Turner, Otho S. and Lizzie D. Those are my great grandparents. And Bonnewell and Bennett and Scott. Well, these, and I'm not sure about the Killimans, which are top and bottom here, but the rest of them, except, well, not the traders. The rest of them are all related to my great grandparents on her side, and they are her siblings as well as her parents and aunts and uncles. So do look at the pages before and after the neighboring families. People didn't travel a whole lot in a lot of the time period, especially in rural areas. So you often find neighbors marrying neighbors. So you may have a little less work to do to find your ancestors. Census can also tell us relative age, and many years where the person was born, at least to the state level, and an occupation or trade, whether they could read and write. So the census can tell us a lot of good things. Tree type resources, these are some print ones. And I use that term because we are so used to now in the 21st century going online and looking at family trees. Sometimes we forget to look at the older resources. So this is a family history on my mom's side of the family. This is a family history on my dad's side of the family. Now, this is a more recent family history, and she did her genealogical work, and she gives sources for much of the information. And so it's very easy to fact check what she found, where she found, and whether you agree with how she read the document. This Bass Families of the South was published in earlier period, and some parts of that book have been proven to be almost completely and utterly made up, because at the time period and the person who wanted that Bass family done and paid the researcher to do it, they wanted particular outcomes of who they were related to. And that has caused some issues through the years. So again, check the sources. Can you verify this information? Can you look at these land records or whatever? And do you make the same conclusion on relationships? There are also wonderful local history books. This happens to be a Sampson County Heritage from North Carolina. Many North Carolina counties have done these books. These are little biographical sketches submitted by living family members for deceased family members, and they are great. Again, check the sources, see if you can verify the information you can find in them. However, sometimes these give you the best hints on where, okay, I'm looking in the wrong county kind of situation. Because they might say, Dad came here from, name the place. And now you know to look at wherever that place is. So don't discount it, but use it as one piece of a research strategy. Online trees, and this is a small tree that I put together for example, so I didn't have to black so much out. In genealogy, we do try to keep the privacy of living individuals. So in our online trees, anyone who is living will be marked out as a little pink girl or a little blue boy or a little gray unknown on Ancestry. If they don't have a death date and their birth is less than 110 years ago or something like that, I'm not sure totally. They keep changing that slightly. This particular tree, we can see everything because I'm the owner of the tree, so it shows everything to me. So if it's your tree, you can see all the living people. The little green hints are saying, hey, we've got suggestions for you on this. But it shows you the person and their spouse. If I had my father in here, this would show him in the children, and then their parents and their parents. This is my grandfather's profile page on this, and in the facts tab, you will see it has this list of facts. And this is a screenshot, so if I clicked on one, it's not going to show me. But if you click on birth, it will put lines to whatever sources here list the birth. So it can help you know what document is telling you that he was born in 1880, what document is telling you that he died in 1915. You will also see, oh, there was a young man's draft card here. He didn't serve in the military. And this, I mean, he died in 1950. So this was for World War II. You may find a grave and other cemetery indexes. He died in Virginia. That is his death certificate, although my father's also names him. So you may find names on various records. And then you see his parents named here. and his 2 siblings and his spouse. So if you see an online tree, you can look at the profile page. And if the only source here is an ancestry family tree, I would really be skeptical of what you're finding out on that page, but take it as a hint and see if you can find sources that tell you that name, that person was in that place at that time. So, first steps of DNA testing. This is a recommended testing pattern by the DNA detectives who work with a lot of adoptees. But to test the autosomal, which tests the breadth of your DNA, at Ancestry.com, because it's the largest, and or 23andMe, those are the 2 testing companies that do not allow uploads from other companies. And then you transfer the results once you get them. As I said, it's about a 2-month delay for most people, to Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, GEDmatch, and Living DNA. Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, and Living DNA also offer their own tests, so you can test there. But if you're worried about money, because this can add up pretty quickly, I would test with Ancestry, wait for a sale if you can hold off. Black Friday's coming, but they tend to run sales Labor Day, etc. And people do ask about a Y-DNA test, which is the male to male, the father to father to father to father to father line, or the mtDNA, which is the mom to 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 mom line. And we don't recommend those for first steps unless there are specific questions relating to those 2 extreme lines, because those only tell you 1 line each, whereas the autosomal test talks about the whole tree. So if you're interested in doing a DNA test as you get started in genealogy, go ahead and order one when there's on sale, but go ahead and work on your paper trail research first, and as you're waiting for the test results. Next steps. There are all sorts of documents that we can look at beyond those basic first step documents, and then we'll talk about the next steps in DNA testing. So, wills, probate, estate records. These are the records that are created when someone who has property dies. This is a will, this is actually estate case 31 in Marion County, South Carolina, for one of my whatever great-grandfathers. You will see that they are often handwritten, mostly handwritten until you get well into the 20th century. Do always check for multiple pages. This is about a 50-page probate file. And different states are going to organize the process of how they deal with the paperwork created by someone dying in different ways. So in South Carolina, we bundle it all together into probate court and probate, and it's in an estate file like this. You may see this is part of the settlement calculation for who was getting what parts of the estate. This is actually part of the will, dividing up what he has. But different states may use different courts. So you may see something, South Carolina also has equity court. Equity court is often the court that oversaw the estates and probate. But other states have chancery court and orphans court, and sometimes it's just in general court. So you need to do a little bit of research and find out, ask some questions about what the situation is in the state and area you're researching. I forgot to put this link in the handout. Sorry about that. But Family Search has a great learning wiki that will tell you what records are available and organization of records and what different courts are called at different time periods online. Ancestry also has some resources as well. But you can also contact us at the library or contact a library close to the area where you are researching, because they'll know what local records are going to entail. Land records are also going to be on the county level, most likely. And again, they're often handwritten. This is from Accomack County, Virginia. South Carolina deeds look very similar. This is a clerk's recording of the deed. The person selling and the person buying would also have their personal copies of the transaction. So all of these records, you may have multiple ways to find them. Do check for multiple pages or continuations of things onto the next page. And particularly in South Carolina, because South Carolina hung on to this until the mid-'80s, watch for a woman registering a dower relinquishment for land records in particular. A dower is the woman's right to life estate and 1/3 of the property. And South Carolina held on to this, again, till the mid-'80s. Other states, as you get into the 20th century, that starts falling away. But in South Carolina, it gives you a chance to find out who was married. And again, it's registered in the county where the sale happened or the purchase happened. Military records. This is a good second round of research for people who might have been of the right age to serve in various military conflicts. On the upper right, this is a draft registration card for the old man's draft. He was too old to actually serve, but they registered the people who were over 40 and under 52, I think it was. And you may find actual signatures. So, you know, that's his actual signature and next of kin. And so that would be his wife, who apparently only has Mrs. W.A. as a name. But it's good information to know. This larger document is an Army registration ledger from the 1830s during the some of the Indian Wars and Seminole Wars. And I have an ancestor here, George Scott, who was from Accomack County, Virginia, registering in New York. His obituary in 1902 tells quite the tale. So it gives you some information, and it gives you enough information to know, hey, this is the right person, even though New York was not where I was expecting him to enlist in the military. Military records can be ordered from the National Archives, or Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. Please note that many 20th century military records were destroyed in a fire in 1973. They are working to reconstruct those records, and it never hurts to fill in the paper and ask the question. And please note, there is a 62-year privacy restriction from separation of service. So World War II, many of those records are free and open to the public to request. You do have to pay a copying fee. But if that person went in, say, at the end of World War II and served into Vietnam as a career military person, their record is still private until 62 years from when they left the military. So just something to remember as you're looking for the various records. You may have letters, diaries, family papers. This is the diary of Kate Allen Eady. She was my great-grandmother's sister, and I have not read this in detail. I did a really quick open it, hold it, take a picture of each page kind of situation when I had access to it. But it's a wonderful little snapshot into the life of the family, although they were both adults and living in different states at this point, because my great-grandmother had moved to Virginia. Kate was still in South Carolina. But you may find mentions in siblings' diaries if you have not been fortunate enough to get inherit from your own relative. City directories are a great resource. But you have to know that the location needed to be large enough to have a city directory, but not too large. Places like Chicago, New York City, Philadelphia, Boston, large cities, did have city directories early, but by the early, maybe to about 100 years ago, they actually had to stop doing city directories because the directories were too large to be able to gather the information, publish, and have anybody pay for that. So I want to say Chicago stops in 1916 or something. So you may find city directories, you may not. These do exist for periods long before the telephone. And then the telephone book comes in and works with the city directory, and in many places takes the place of the city directory. You will find, similarly to a telephone book, you can have people, businesses, community organizations, white pages, business listings, yellow pages. Sometimes city directories have street address listings. So that's kind of cool too. So always look around, particularly if you find it on some place like Ancestry where it's a name index. Feel free to flip through the book virtually. Easier to do physical book, I realize, but also flip through it to see if you might find more information. And particularly if you know they owned a business, because you see all of these lovely ads surrounding the page. But you do find names of businesses and people who run businesses. I was looking for this Joseph L.B. Kelly, who was a grocer in Macon, Georgia in 1899. Yearbooks. Yearbooks are a great resource. You notice I didn't pick any of mine. I do have all of mine. But this would be my father's first cousin, Lewis here. And then over here, one of my mother's second cousins, or my grandfather's first cousins. I think it was my grandfather's first cousin. This Whiteside, Murdy May Whiteside here. But you may find people in the individual listings, or you may find them in group pictures or group listings of various organizations. So it doesn't hurt to look. And it gives you context to what were they interested in? What did they do? So next steps of DNA testing. So you've sent off your test, you've waited your couple months to get the results, and now you've got results. Now what do you do? Well, first off, you look at your closest matches. Do you know who they are? Do their names make sense? Are they your cousins? Are they your second cousins? Have you found people with these names in your paper research? You can group them into family lines by also looking at who matches these closer matches, and group them in, initially you're trying to get them into 4 grandparent groups, and then 8 great-grandparent groups, and work through. Please note that the categories given by the testing companies are just a general bucket and not a definitive connection other than parent-child. Full siblings are usually fairly definitive, but after that it gets very murky. And Ancestry's categories is close family, 2nd to 3rd cousins, 4th to 6th cousins, and then 5th to 8th cousins, or 5th to distant. I think they've changed it too. So you're looking at these very big buckets, but just because it says, oh, you're probably a first cousin, well, that may mean that you're a first cousin once removed. It could mean that you're a half sibling. It could mean a lot of things, like great aunt or uncle. So there's this wonderful tool on DNApainter.com called the shared centimorgan tool. A centimorgan is the unit of measurement for DNA. And you enter the centimorgans for your match, or if you're on 23andMe and it gives you a percentage, you click enter percentage and enter the percentage. And then it will tell you which of these categories are the most likely to be where you're going to be related. Now, they're not always right, but it's at least someplace to start researching. So you work your way through identifying the various people. So as you're gathering all of this information, you need to evaluate what you discover. You need to be skeptical. It's one of my favorite words, which means put your thinking cap on. Is this information making sense? Think about the sources. Is this a good source? A court document? A legal paper from the government? Is it a bad source? Is it something that you cannot verify? Is it a snip of gossip that, well, according to my grandmother, we're related to both President Johnsons and Lyndon Johnson quite closely. Well, nothing I have found even comes close to making a connection. DNA, paper trail, anything. But she heard it and she wanted it to be true, so she told me that. So sometimes you have good sources, sometimes you have bad sources. Just like if you were writing a paper for history class or looking at the science lab, doing an experiment. You have to be thinking about what the source is telling you and how good it is. Is it possible that there is someone else in the same place at the same time with the same name who may have married someone with the same name too? And so you have to be able to get out of your narrow, I'm searching for this person, to make sure, okay, who else has that name in this community? Does someone? Maybe there isn't one. So sometimes you have 4 or 5 people with the same name who are all buying land that you can't tell who is who and which one owned the land. And it takes time and other resources to try to get that figured out. My George W. Scott of the Indian Wars, he's one of those. There are 4 different George Scotts in Accomack County at that time. 2 of them are George W's, and I cannot figure out all of the details. Could this person have a child of the age given or known? Now, people did fudge their ages, but nobody's really going to have a child at age 6. And so make sure you do the math, and if it's too close of a generation, you may have either a wrong person or there's a transcription of the age that is incorrect, but there's something there that's not making sense. Dad can't have died 10 years before child was born. It does not work. Do the dates, locations, and relationships logically work out? If someone is coming in from another location, can you verify that they actually had a reason to come into the community, or how did they meet up with this person? These 2 people from 2 very different states, why did they marry? I have a situation where great-grandfather's sister, after the Civil War, actually married one of the Union officers who had been in their region of Virginia, and she went off to upstate New York and never to come back to Virginia. So until I could put the pieces together with some of her descendants as to, no, this is what happened, here's what we know on our side of the family, I couldn't connect. She is the oldest of 10, and my ancestor is the youngest of 10. Their parents died when my ancestor was 0 and 3. So we didn't have family history on that side of the family that came down from him because he didn't know it. So you've got to be able to put the pieces together and be able to verify that this could be the right person. Just because Ancestry gives you a hint that says, in the 1841 England census, well, if your person's in Rockbridge County, Virginia, they're not going to be on the English census. It's a little distant, 1 year apart between 1840 and 1841, or 1850 and 1851. So make sure you're thinking this through. And also on the census, you may find that a spouse is younger than the older children could have, that they could have had, because they might have been 6. So that could be a second spouse. And so that gives you another question to ask to say, hey, this could be a different person. So family stories and material history are another place to look. Do interview older family members and look around the house for things you might have inherited. Interview older family members, ask them about their own lives, not just about the common ancestors. Show a little interest, it'll get you a lot further along. Do prepare open-ended questions about topics of interest. So instead of asking, did you attend Shenandoah School? Maybe say, can you tell me about where you went to school? What were the sizes of the classes? How many students were in your class? Some things that will get a conversation started and get stories started. Sometimes they're going to want to go off in a direction that you don't anticipate, but sometimes those lead to some of the best family secrets. Remember that some people have better recall of details than others. My grandmother was not a good source. Some of her nieces, who were almost her age, perfect, but grandma was not a good source. Do record the interview with audio or video. Do take notes. Obviously ask permission. And then see if you can verify the situations discussed. This is the George Scott of that Indian Wars record, and there are 4 generations of family in this picture. My grandmother's older sister, her mother, her parents, and they are the parents of all of the children in this picture, and then he is Georgiana's father. So my father did some work to try to identify who each of the children were and gives me some married names to look at. So that is helpful. I have verified all of this information, and I do know that he is George W. Scott. Dad didn't have that information when he was doing the label. Material history. Look for the things passed down in your family: quilts, china, dishes, jewelry, furniture, art, books, musical instruments, toys. What was important to your family? What did they purchase? What did they make? What was saved to hand down? Did they create it? Did they purchase it? Can you document which line of the family it was from? And especially for women, these items can fill in some of the record gaps. The more I've looked at this accordion in this picture today, the less I think it's the one that I have on my shelf that my great-grandmother did play. But obviously accordion was something important as a musical instrument to this side of the family because I inherited that. The quilt is a story of types of fabric and different things, and so did not inherit the quilt. But that can tell you more about the family. Record keeping. How do you keep up with your stuff? And you're going to have physical stuff and you're going to have digital stuff. So the physical stuff, I have a series of file folders, and I typically have this set as each couple, because this is for a DAR application lineage, and I had to prove the person and their link to their parent and any marriages, divorces, name changes for the women. And so, and I was doing a joint research that my mother was also going in on this line. And so her generation 1 was my generation 2. Anyway, a pedigree chart is very similar to that online tree that I had showed you earlier. And you start with yourself and you put your name in and the date you were born, the location you were born. If you're married, you add that. You don't add death for yourself yet. Someone else will have to do that. And then your father and your mother, and you keep going back. And it's a physical chart from old school days, but you can have as many charts as you need, and you can go back as far as you want on one family line before starting. It's very flexible. And in the handout packet, there are copies of these forms. This is the family unit chart, which is another piece that shows you the husband, the wife, the children, and again, my grandfather's older brother, Jasper. It's a whole lot easier to research Jasper Rouse than it is John, because there are only a handful of Jasper Rouses. And in my family, 4 of the last 5 generations are John Rouses. And so it gets very confusing very quickly. And John Rouse every Rouse family has a bajillion. So, and you can make notes. There are various family unit charts and pedigree charts out there. You can Google it. You find one that works for you if you're doing the pen and paper version. Research log or record. This is very helpful because it helps you know where you have looked for what. An Excel spreadsheet is a great place to keep this information, but you can also keep it in a legal pad or in a phone app or a Word document, however you want to do it. I'm not as good at this as I should be, but knowing who you were searching for, what resource did you look in, whether it was a database or a book, where was the resource? Was it an Ancestry or a library? What search terms did you use? Were you looking for one line of the family? Oops, I need to go back to that book for a different line. What did you find? Nothing is valid. And then when you did the search, the Ancestry and other databases do add stuff to resources relatively often. Books don't change. Correspondence log. If you have sent off for an obituary from a library, for instance, you need to know when you sent it, where you sent it, how you sent it. Did you mail it? Did you email it? Did you call? Contact information that you sent it to, what you were asking, when you received something, and what did you receive. I can't tell you how many times we get phone calls from people. Well, I ordered this. Well, when did you put it in the mail? Oh, well, I just put it in the mail 2 days ago. 2 to 4 weeks. And we haven't even received it yet. So be patient, but also know that if it's been 4 weeks and the repository says that's their normal turnaround time, it doesn't hurt to follow up and inquire and say, hey, I was just making sure you got this request. With the current conditions, timelines are messed up, but it never hurts to track. But do track and make sure you aren't pestering a repository, because that wastes time that they could be using to look up your request. And that also works for family members and things if you asked for information from an aunt or something, so that you're not pestering them. Digitally, there are ways to keep up with this stuff. The online tree, such as you saw earlier in the presentation from Ancestry. MyHeritage also has online trees, or Family Search. Family Search is a wiki tree, which means anyone who is deceased is open for anyone to edit. I tend to avoid it. The last time I was on Family Search's tree, I discovered that somebody had my mother as deceased. She is very much alive. I was not a happy camper. You may want to do a software program on your computer. Family Tree Maker, Roots Magic, Legacy are three of the big ones. Family Tree Maker and Roots Magic do sync with Ancestry as well as Family Search. So if you want to download information more easily, those would be ones to look at, as opposed to Legacy or some of the other ones that you would have to do data entry. Roots Magic does have a free version, so that may be something to check out. And this is just a way to organize it and keep it on your computer in addition to or instead of online. And then digital file folders. I have a friend, a genealogy friend, who organizes his stuff beautifully. And everything is by type of record, by date. It is gorgeous. I'm not that disciplined. My brain doesn't work that way. And I'm never on the same computer 2 times in a row, because sometimes I'm at work and sometimes I'm at home and sometimes I'm on a library computer somewhere. And so my stuff does not always get organized as well as it should. This is a census records folder that I have on my computer, and it is organized by date, by name of head of household, and I do have blank census records for the various years, because sometimes you cannot read the headers on the copies that have been written on, and knowing what that field is, and I got tired of going back online all the time and having to look it up. So I just pulled it down into this folder so I have them easily accessible. You will see that I have some random items that have crept into this folder. I do need to do some cleanup and refiling. And since I started my big ancestry research tree and syncing it to Family Tree Maker, I have not been as good as keeping up with these digital copies as I should have been, but it's a good practice to load the documents as well, because you never know that something that was on Ancestry yesterday is going to be there tomorrow. So I know we ran a little bit after 8. I apologize. We started a little bit late, and I apologize for that. But thank you so much for listening. And do please check out more presentations on the SCPL YouTube page. And come visit us. We are open by appointment right now in the Kennedy Room of Local and South Carolina History, housing the Cleveland Genealogical Collection and the SCPL archives.